Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Adamola Bookmen podcast. I'm here with my co-host, John Coughlin. Hi, Johnny.
Hola, Al.
Hola, Johnny. And this week, we're doing Garrincha, the triumph and tragedy of Brazil's forgotten footballing hero. Now, this is a bit of a departure for us, Johnny, because this is not an autobiography. This is a football biography, and I figured we could litigate that right now for the audio enjoyment of our listeners.
Yes. Do you regret it all now, switching to a biography? Would you prefer it to be reading Mark Noble?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't rather be doing that. No, this has really opened my eyes, Johnny. The time that I spent reading that fucking filth by James Milner, just this stupid bullshit, and I could have been living in 1950s Rio de Janeiro.
People other than footballers are capable of writing books as well.
Well, I didn't realise that before, but in fact, they're actually capable of writing books better than footballers. Who'd have thought it? Or sports journalists.
Yeah.
So this is, Garrincha. And Johnny, before we get started, here's one of those moments. It's careful what you wish for. Now, long-term listeners of this podcast might remember that what I've always been looking for in my football books is a little bit more sexy time, something just a little bit titillating, nothing disgusting, but I want to hear about it. Well, we got it, didn't we, Johnny? We got it. We got some sex.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what I didn't want was a 10-year-old with a massive cock fucking a goat.
You know,
woo, baby. I mean, this is chapter 2 as well. They don't keep you waiting.
You know what I loved about that particular part? I read it out to Jenny as well. He had sex with a goat. Then he says, which was the case for 99% of rural Brazilians at the time. I was thinking,
Well, you didn't have sex with a goat, weirdo. Yeah, I think he's declaring something about himself, old Roy Castro there, eh? Yeah, everyone did. What do you mean? Yeah. Me, Garrincha? I'm sure everybody was having sex with goats. 99% of people lost virginity to a goat.
It's not the goat we were expecting in this conversation, I guess.
It wasn't. But I'll tell you what, when you Google Garrincha, that's the first thing that comes up. Garrincha goat, and I don't think it means greatest of all time.
That is a mark of the book. As you said, it's written by Rui Castro.
R-U-Y.
Yeah, Castro. I looked him up. He's a very successful, high profile biographer in Brazil, but most of his writing was around music. He did a biography of Bossa Nova, or a history of Bossa Nova, and he's written biographies of various kind of Brazilian musical superstars.
Well, I'd read those books because this book was, spoiler alert, fucking brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant.
Was it brilliant because of the writing, or just brilliant because of the story?
No, I thought the writing was good as well. I really did. I absolutely devoured this book, Johnny. I enjoyed every single page. I mean, the writing, it was crisp. The story kept rattling along. You know, when you have like lists and details, like you say about games, that didn't really happen.
No.
It moved on fast.
Yeah.
I feel that he was empathetic to the other cast of characters. I don't know if I know that much about Garrincha the man. I just know his deeds. But nonetheless, his deeds were fabulously compelling. This was a brilliant book.
Garrincha's voice is absent from the book, but maybe that's because he wrote the guy was playing in the 60s at the end of the day. So I'm sure the guy did the best with what he had to work with. You said in our last episode when we were talking about Peter Taylor, you mentioned, imagine how cool it would have been to go to Mallorca in the 70s. Imagine how cool it would have been to go to Rio de Janeiro in the 1950s and the 1960s. Would have been bloody magic, man.
It's fabulous, isn't it? I mean, it just brings it alive. And the whole music journalism thing, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because a lot is made of his relationship with what is a very famous Brazilian singer
Were you? Did you know
Elza
her?
Soares. No, not at all.
So you lived in Brazil for how long?
9 months.
In
9 months
Sao Paulo.
in São Paulo, in Higienópolis, which is where he lived when he went there with Elza. So I got a
Okay.
kick out of that because that's a chic little neighborhood.
Okay. So Elza Suarez, it was voted by the BBC or named or voted by the BBC as the joint greatest singer of the 20th century. I'd never even heard of her.
The joint greatest singer of it. Well, false. False.
Well, I'm reporting fact. Herself and Tina Turner.
Okay. All right. Well, they've got the biggest hair of the 20th century. I had a look at a picture of Elza Soares recently. Well, she's dead now, but bloody hell, her hair was massive, massive, and purple.
Yeah.
All right, we're deviating. So
yeah, we'll
Elza
get to
Soares.
it.
Shall we go back to the beginning, Johnny? Go back to Big Stick.
Off the big stick we go, Alistair. So his name is Manuel Francisco dos Santos, and he was born in 1933. He is the grandchild of slaves. Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, Brazil is, absolutely scarred by the legacy of slavery.
More slaves sent to Brazil than to the US, right? During the period of transatlantic slavery.
I read that statistic in a slave museum in Brazil. 7 times the number.
Yeah, so his family they moved as a result of plantations and stuff like that, and they moved towards Rio de Janeiro, where all of his family were working in and around this English-run textile factory, which had a football team significantly. And he was nicknamed by his sister as Garrincha, which means little bird.
So he's born into what sounds like a bucolic idyll, doesn't it, Johnny? It sounds absolutely fabulous. People just plucked fruit from the trees to eat. Young Garrincha was free like a little bird. He just ran around with no obligations at all. It sounded like a kind of a wonderful childhood.
I did think at this stage, it did sound like the author worked for the factory or something. It was like he was writing a pamphlet for American Fabric or whatever it was called, because he was just so glowing about the factory. But yes, Garrincha wasn't wealthy by any stretch of imagination, but he didn't suffer like the grinding poverty of Elza, his future wife, in the favela in Rio. His family were working hard in a factory, but living in a house, and it didn't sound terrible. And he was a happy kid, a very happy kid.
Yeah, very happy kid with an extraordinarily large penis. The writer is at lengths to point out, unintended. You really do get to hear about the size of Garrincha's genitalia from a young age as well. From a young age, right? He makes sure we are aware of that. And
he's from a place called Pau Grande, which means big stick, which is a slang term in Brazil for erection. So there's a lot of dick-based material in the earlier parts of the book.
Well, he's setting the scene, isn't he, Johnny? He's setting the scene, because Garrincha's dick plays a massive role in this book. A massive role. I'm not knocking it. So, his father is a kind of a local drunk, isn't he? And he sort of mooches around, but through the rest of his family, his sisters.
A drunk and a Lothario.
Again, setting the scene. The acorn didn't fall far from the tree.
No. His family are very absent in the story, aren't they? His sister named him Garrincha. His father, he nearly killed his father in a car accident. But other than that, there's not a lot going on in terms of his that side of his life.
Yeah, I mean, there's many references. He often returns to his birthplace. In fact, that's a big feature of his early life. He's always returning to where he was born, Pau Grande. But you don't hear much about his parents. But then there's a lot else to hear about, isn't there?
Yeah, you hear a lot about Pencil and Swing, though, don't you?
Oh, Pencil and Swing. These are 2 motherfuckers that dragged poor old Garrincha down, didn't they?
Pencil means paintbrush, so I don't know why he didn't just call him Paintbrush, because that's so much cooler.
Yeah. Okay.
Paintbrush and Swing were his 2 friends. His two friends who were working in this textile factory by day, playing for the textile factory's team, which Garrincha continued to play for years, and then just drinking around the clock with Garrincha when they're not in the factory. It's quite a funny kind of double life they were leading, wasn't it?
And yeah, I don't think they're doing much work as Garrincha actually becomes a footballer, are they? I mean, there's just references to them urinating themselves on Garrincha's sofa or something. Whilst his appalled wife looks on. Absolute nightmare, aren't they? An absolute nightmare. These are like Jimmy Five Bellies times 10.
Yeah, yeah, Jimmy 50 Bellies. So he worked in the factory as a young man. He was quite an insouciant character, Garrincha. He'd be falling asleep inside the factory, even though there's all of these threshing machines making a mad racket. He just seemed to like. It's funny, just the difference in that him as a character, because in the earlier years, he just is walking on a cloud. He just seems to have a lovely way about him. People really gravitate towards him. He's just got a gift, a really unusual gift for football. Because I guess, okay, the thing that everybody knows about Garrincha, anyone who knows anything about Garrincha, is that he had a disability, right? He had a curved spine, and he had crooked knees, essentially. This was a big part of the story of Garrincha. And
well, it's genuinely remarkable, isn't it? Because, yeah, one of his legs was 6 centimeters shorter than the other. So the idea that someone born with that affliction would become a professional footballer and possibly the greatest footballer who was on earth at that time is genuinely fabulous.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So he had one leg, and one knee was bent inwards and the other knee was bent outwards.
Yeah, this isn't one of those things. It's like obvious. You look at pictures of him and his legs are wonky. It's not like, oh, he's an unusual leg formation. No, his legs are genuinely crooked.
Yeah.
Right. And just going back, I mean, you talk about him walking on a cloud in his youth. And the writer doesn't particularly stress this, but he was a real charmer, wasn't he? He must have been so charming. Like, he got away with everything. He was late for work, falling asleep at work, or one more chance. And with the girls, apparently, they just fell over themselves to be with him. He just had to wink at them, like, and there were girls. He was always surrounded by girls. He's a real charmer. He's not a bad-looking fella, is he? But, like, he's no beauty.
The very fact, like, I think he just had like I said, kind of an insouciant character where he wasn't that bothered by things. He wasn't signed to Botafogo until he was 20 years old. And part of that was because of his legs. You know, he had trials with Vasco da Gama and with Fluminense, and they turned him down. And I think part of it was on site. They were like, this guy's not a footballer. But the other side of it is that he doesn't seem to have been all that bothered. You know, this is not a guy who was like, I am burning to be a professional footballer. He didn't really think about it as a life, as a professional choice, as something that he could do. But then eventually he kept playing with the factory team. And at some point there was a guy from Botafogo in the area and was reffing in a match or something like that, or had come to play in a friendly and was like, Jesus Christ, this guy's amazing. And off he goes to Botafogo when he's 20. So he's a late bloomer, like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it. I don't think he was particularly interested in football. The 1950 World Cup, he wasn't even watching it. Wasn't even bothered.
He was fishing.
Which is remarkable, right? In a country that is so famously football mad as Brazil, and arguably their second ever greatest player, and he didn't even watch the 1950 World Cup. Off fishing. Yeah,
they keep saying throughout the book that for him, the joy in football was not winning or even scoring goals. It was dribbling. And this is the thing that when you do any kind of searching about Garrincha online, he's the greatest dribbler ever. Did you watch much footage of him?
Yes, I did. And I kind of wish I hadn't. Because it just looks so lame. I mean, I really watched ages and like he did he'd just do that thing, drop a shoulder, and the players would like run off and it would all be well. But they're at pains to point out during games he would beat a man, and then instead of passing the ball for the lad to score, he'd let the lad catch up with him, and then he'd beat him again for fun.
Yeah, and apparently this put him out of the Brazil team because he did it in a match. He let a fella, he was through on goal, he rounded the keeper or something, and he waited for a defender to come back so he could go by him again. And he did, and he scored anyway.
Yeah, and something I didn't realize, and as a result of these skills, he was the first player that ever got the ole
Yeah, that was
from
fun.
football fans.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, I
fun.
mean, that was a thing from bullfighting, but it had never been done in football. And apparently, he was the first player who provoked the Olays.
Yeah, that
So
was in
that is
Mexico.
huge, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a pile of fun. That is a pile of
70
fun.
years later, we still do it in every country in the world. They still do it. I bet they do it in Russia.
Did you see the goal he scored against England?
Yes.
It was an absolute fucking yeah. A folio secco, a falling leaf, a lob.
Yeah, he was ever so gifted, but it doesn't always look great on the old footage, does it? Like, considering the pitches he was playing with and the balls.
What he did a lot was he would stand still and have the defender standing still, and then he would just dart one way. And sometimes he'd go to dart one way and he'd dart the other way. There was a lot of that in the footage, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was. I mean, yeah, he could change direction on a sixpence.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, as I say, a lot of what you see, it's also like when you watch like Pele's greatest moments. It's like, oh, Pele shows from the halfway line, he misses. Like, oh, Pele, oh, he's run around the keeper, he's missed again. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff, but you don't always see the finish. And obviously, because of the time, there's so many great goals, so many great moments which wouldn't have been recorded.
That Pele goal in the 1958 World Cup final against Sweden, he scored two, but one of them is a beautiful goal. It's like the Tisse goal. He puts it over the defender and he smacks it into the net. Absolutely lovely.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay,
So,
but we're obviously racing ahead. So yeah, he goes to Botafogo. And so obviously my knowledge of Brazilian club football in the 1950s was limited. And I had no idea that. So it wasn't until the 70s, I think it was 1971, that there was kind of a unified national championship. So when he led Botafogo in 1957, I think it was their first championship in 9 years, but it was a state championship. So him and Pele weren't actually playing against each other all that much.
no, it's very confusing, the Brazilian league system. And it remains to this day. They do have a national championship now, but it sort of runs at a different time to the state championships, which is still a thing, which ends up with these like absolutely massive teams playing like these little like no hopers. It's like, yeah, Forest are playing in the Premier League, but also we have a league where we play Notts County and Mansfield
Really?
and Chesterfield all the time.
And another confusing thing, a kind of foundational part of the Garrincha and Pele stories, when they won the World Cup in 1958, Brazil had a real chip on their shoulder. They were kind of perennial losers. And they'd lost the 1950 World Cup, which was in Brazil. They'd built the Maracanã for the World Cup in 1950. And if you were to read about it, it says that Brazil lost in the final to Uruguay. But the final, it wasn't a final as such, because the end of the World Cup was a round robin involving 4 teams, which is weird, isn't it? And it just so
Very
happened,
satisfying.
yeah, it just so happened the way it played out that it came down to this one game between Uruguay and Brazil, but that was just a quirk of the other results. So the other 2 teams in the round robin were Sweden and Spain. But Brazil were the huge favourites. It was in the Maracanã, and then they lost, and the game was known as the Maracanazo, the Maracana Smash. And as a result, Brazil, who used to play in white, they were so disappointed and upset that they changed their national strip colour to the yellow that we now know. There you go.
Yeah, 1950 was a huge national trauma for Brazil.
Yeah.
And I believe, yeah, people who were still around, who were there alive at the time, they still hold that with them. It's the most traumatic match.
There was 200,000 people at that match. It was
Bloody well think so.
something like 1 in 10 people in Rio at the time. But it's the record for the amount of people attending a football match. I dare say it won't be beat.
Yeah, so getting back to Garrincha, when he signed for Botafogo, was already a father of 3, right? A father of 3.
Yeah, and he kept up that pace through his life. 14 kids that we know about.
And I think it's generally accepted there are quite a few more,
including one in Sweden when he went there for the World Cup in 1958.
Little Ulf Garrincha.
Ulf's son played for Brentford.
Did he?
Yeah, he signed for Brentford in like 2018, but I googled him. He's without a club now. But yeah, he was a
No kidding, though. The grandchild of Garrincha played for Brentford.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool. Okay, so a couple of lighter moments. Yeah, Garrincha struggled a lot to get to training, mainly as a result of him drinking a lot. And again, this is what I'm talking about. He must have been charming because he got away with this a lot. As long as he turned up and played on the day, a lot of his managers would give him a lot of grace because of his skills. But there are a couple of people that helped him to get to training, and I just thought this was funny. It was a couple of taxi drivers. One was called Cabinho, and the other one was called Cabrita. Say what you see, Brazil.
so like this is what I mean. It's just such a juxtaposition in the earlier days, just walking on a cloud, and then yeah, this just really tragic end. You know that stuff when he went to the World Cup in 1962 in Chile. Before he went, they were in the home of the governor of, I think it was Sao Paulo, and there was a myna bird, which is kind of like a parrot, something that a bird that talks. And Grincha was mad about animals. You know, his name is the little bird after all. And he was so besotted with this little bird that the governor said, if you win the World Cup, you can have the bird. And they won the World Cup, he got the bird, and there's some people who say that that was the moment. It was that bird that cursed Garrincha. And that was the moment in his life when things all fell apart.
Well, that's a shame for him. Just another interesting side note about that 62 World Cup was that the Brazilian delegates organised a brothel, an entire brothel for the Brazilian team.
24 prostitutes.
It's quite a departure because chapter 4 is called Vital Fluids, and believe you me, Johnny, I was rubbing my hands together there, and one of the managers was absolutely insistent that no sex was had before games because they needed their vital fluids. But apparently by 62 that thought set had gone. And,
it just advances in sports science, I suppose, you know.
Marginal gains. Yeah, man. These guys had a lot of sex. A lot.
And Garrincha was, you know, he was best in class in that regard, wasn't he?
He certainly was. I mean, they talk about when they went to the 58 World Cup, and these lads were just riddled with disease. They were like First World War soldiers, weren't they? They've all got gonorrhea. I think I read it somewhere. Like, how many teeth did they have? They had like 50 teeth between the whole squad.
Yeah, 50 teeth. Like, so that's, so it's interesting because João Havelange was the head of the Brazil FA in 1958, and he really professionalizes everything. And this includes things like bringing a doctor along, which would have been unheard of at the time. And they brought a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and he was just a bit of an asshole.
Absolutely madman.
Have you ever read a book called How They Stole the Game by David Yollop?
I haven't.
It's about Havelange and Blatter, but Havelange became the head of FIFA, and he was, Blatter was his protege, but he, essentially how they kind of made football what it was and essentially made it like insanely corrupt. But Havelange in this book is a bit of a hero because he's the one who professionalizes the football setup in Brazil. And he also bails Garrincha out at various points in his life when Garrincha is penniless.
Yeah, really in the gutter.
Garrincha lost £9 getting his tonsils out on the eve. £9 from fluid and blood. Fuck me. 58 is kind of when the story of Garrincha takes off, though, isn't it? I mean, from a footballing point of view and from his profile, because he was in and out of the Brazil team. Because there was a lot of good players in Brazil at the time, but it was in 58 that he, just in the lead up to the competition, that he finally nailed his place down in the Brazil team.
Well, that's right. I mean, leading up to 58, he was famous certainly in Rio de Janeiro, but people didn't even know his name. Like, he was called Gaulicho, named after a racehorse. People didn't know his name. He had to do a actual newspaper story where he says, my nickname is Garrincha and my name is Mane.
But yeah, okay, so what happens in the 58 World Cup is there's a group, they draw against Austria, they win against Austria, they draw with England, and then it comes down to the Supermen of USSR. it's interesting, isn't it? Because at the time, USSR was like the epitome of modernity. You know, Sputnik has just gone into space. What's the name of the dog?
Leica.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, so their football was seen as, you know, these were the modern men. It was kind of scientific football against the perennial losers of Brazil. But then they have what was described at the time as the three best ever minutes of football: Garrincha and Pele, who never lost a match together when they played for Brazil, which was a nice little wrinkle. And Garrincha got a bicycle for his performance against the Russians. He enjoyed that as well.
Yeah, he did. He ended up giving it to someone inappropriate, no doubt.
After the groups, they were playing against mighty Wales, and this crazy psychologist did a kind of psychometric test to see who was mentally fit to play in the team, and apparently none of them were. Only two in the entire squad.
I mean, this isn't exactly what he did, but honestly, he just said, "Oh, can you draw a happy face on a page?" And then he'd interpret that. He was a real nutcase.
Yeah.
Yeah, he deemed Garrincha too immature to play football.
Garrincha drew a circle and then said it was the head of his enemy, some player in the Brazilian league.
Well, you're not going to play today, son.
Isn't it funny? Like in 1958, they beat Sweden in the World Cup final, and in 1962 it was Czechoslovakia. And Sweden had been to that round robin final before. It could have been so different for Sweden.
I just imagine, though, the Swedish lads were probably just quite tall and fit, right? And they were playing against this like ragtag bunch of like toothless drunks from Brazil, riddled with gonorrhea. And like, despite not having nearly as much skill, just a big, fit, strong bloke's going to beat like some hideous venereal disease footballer from Brazil.
That's the magic of football, though, isn't
it? Well, it is, isn't it? But anyway, so 1958 was a huge boost for the country of Brazil, really, wasn't it? This is when they got their international identity, I think would be fair to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what is Brazil famous for? It's famous for music, for samba, and it's famous for football, and it's famous for samba football. There you go.
You could say, I mean, this is one man alongside Pele, of course, but Pele was just a kid, famously in 1958, who really did sculpt the way the world saw Brazil, and in such a positive way. Before, Brazil was, I don't know, just a Portuguese large colony in South America. But by the 60s, Brazil was chic and sexy and famous for its brilliant football. And the yellow shirts always help with that, don't they, Johnny? They always help. A brightly coloured shirt will always help you as a football team. I'm sure people wouldn't get so excited about Holland if they didn't wear orange. If they just wore like navy blue or a bloody white shirt like England. Boring.
But on that, so in the final, Sweden, of course, also wore yellow. So there was a thing, who was going to wear yellow, and they had a draw. Or Brazil just refused to participate. They were so terrified of having to wear white again after 1950. But they lost, and Sweden played in yellow, and Brazil played in blue.
Which, again, is iconic now, isn't it?
Really, it must have been just so amazing. Like the footage in that documentary, Garrincha, The Joy of the People, just showing the scenes in the streets in Brazil when they won the World Cup in 58 and 62. It is absolutely insane how crazy people are going. Like the emotion that it brings out of people. It's really something.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, you see that still today, though, don't you? And especially in poorer countries, you see the scenes when whichever team wins the African Cup of Nations. It's mad. Just lovely, 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 which is why football is easily the best sport in the world, because no other game gets anywhere close to that.
So, yeah, by 1959...
Yeah, he was offered Real Madrid tried to sign him.
Yeah, at this point, he has five daughters with his wife Nair. He's got he's got a mistress that he's keeping in an apartment in Rio, because his wife Nair stayed in Pau Grande. And he had two kids, a girl and a boy, with this other lady, Arachi, who also had been working at the factory. But yeah, Real Madrid came calling, but that didn't work out for him. He didn't go. They were tearing it up with Botafogo there at this stage as well. And things were really, I think this World Cup period, 58-62, was probably the best time of his life.
It was his golden time, yeah. And he really had no interest in playing abroad. He liked living in Brazil. He could get away with pretty much anything at that time. He was a national hero. He could just do, well, he did whatever he liked, whenever he liked, right?
Exactly, yeah. And he was drinking. He was a boozer. His father was a boozer, as you said, and I think he started drinking in his teens fairly heavily. But when everything is going grand, I guess that's not a big issue. It only became a major issue for him later in life.
Yeah, it's cachaça, right? It's cachaça, which is like a drink made out of sugar cane.
Exactly, yeah. He was always
which would
cachaça.
explain the lack of teeth as well.
Yeah. So however he did in 1958, the 62 World Cup is kind of seen as Garrincha's World Cup because Pele was injured in the second game against Czechoslovakia. So it was all Garrincha. He scored that lovely goal against England in the quarterfinals. He got sent off against Peru because he was getting kicked in the semis. He was getting kicked around the field by the fullback, and he kicked them in the bottom, and then he got sent off. But he wasn't suspended for the final. There was a big political intervention. I think the president got involved, and the Peruvian president got involved to kind of speak up on his behalf. And yeah, he played in the final, but he was sick in the final. He wasn't very good in the final, but he's remembered as having brought them to the final and essentially for making up for the lack of Pele.
By this time, more and more people were watching the World Cup on TV, so he was becoming a world star.
And this is when he met Elza. Garrincha has an amazing story, and so too does Elza, who's the love of his life. He's already had, by 1962, he's had 7 daughters with his wife Nair, and she's pregnant with their 8th. And he meets this woman, Elza Soares, who herself, by the time she was 21, she had 7 children, 2 of whom had died shortly after they were born. So she had 5 kids, one of whom was given up for adoption. But she was 21 and she went on on a radio talent show to get money to buy medicine for her children. And this woman became one of the massive samba stars of the 60s and the 70s. Right up until she died, like a couple of years ago. She died on the same day as Garrincha, 39 years later. And I was listening to an album of hers today, which she got a Grammy for, which she recorded when she was 85 years old.
Yeah, it was pretty nutty, wasn't it? That's what you sent me to listen to. It was pretty wacky music.
It's good. I like it a lot. Let's see how often I listen to
it. Yeah, every day.
But yeah, so Elza Soares, and not only had she had all these children, she was kind of forced into that relationship. And Castro said that she was essentially being raped regularly by her husband, and he died of tuberculosis when she was 21. So remarkable, as a 21-year-old, she's already lived this life, and then as a totally different life from there on, but constant tragedy in her life.
Well, that's right. I mean, goats played a part in her life, apparently, because she used to suckle on a goat, apparently, when she was a kid, because her mother didn't even produce milk due to the extreme,
poverty. Fucking hell.
Poverty, yeah, the lack of food.
You know, her turn on this radio talent show, I was reading about it, was a bit of a Susan Boyle thing, because she was still young and she was tiny, and she borrowed a dress from her mother, which she kind of had to wrap around her for it to fit. And when she walked onto the stage, everybody was laughing at her. And then she brought the house down. That's pretty nice, isn't it?
Yeah, she is one heck of a character. This is the absolute love of his life. And she is, because, man, she puts up with his shit, right? For years. Unbelievable shit.
Yeah, just chronic alcoholism, just disappearing from early morning, disappearing, just being drunk. And he was a inveterate womanizer, although he does seem to have paused that, at least at the start of the Elza years, right?
At the start.
Yeah.
But this again speaks to his charm, right? Because this is this is a pop star, a rich, successful woman who presumably could have, and beautiful woman who could have pretty much anyone she wants.
Would you remember the name of the man she was seeing when she started going out with Garrincha?
Mr. Banana.
Milton. Milton Banana. What a great name.
um, I guess it would be all right. I mean, you wouldn't want to be called Banana in a school in Ireland or England, though, would you, Johnny? I mean, imagine, what's your name? Milton. What's your last name? No, don't have one. Yeah, I did make a note of that. Good old Milton Banana.
Elza went to the 1962 World Cup as a kind of a cultural representative of Brazil. It was on in Chile, and they were meeting, despite the fact that they had been, as you said, that the Brazilian FA, on the one hand, had secured 24 prostitutes for the team, but they were keeping other people strictly away from the team. But anyway, Garrincha was just wandering off at various times to meet Elza and other women, it seems. And yeah, this is when they met. And when they won the World Cup, beating Czechoslovakia in the final, she wandered into the dressing room full of the naked players and had an embraced Garrincha, a naked Garrincha. He dropped his towel to give her a kiss.
Well, maybe this is the secret, eh? This is Garrincha's big stick. Might have done the work for him there. Indeed, after he won one of the World Cups, a hit song was released called Garrincha's Big Stick.
He has a song himself. He was humming a song, and Elza was like, "Where'd you hear that?" And he said, "I didn't hear it anywhere. I made it up." And she said, "Okay." And she wrote lyrics, and that is now a song of hers, sorry.
Yeah, he really is a character, isn't he? Just fabulous. But it's at this point in the book, 62, because up until this point, this has been a joyous, fun read, hasn't it, Johnny? But things start to turn sour now. He always had a problem with his knees, and this is where it begins, right?
But everything happens at once, doesn't it, really? Because physically his body starts to let him down. The shape of his knees seems to have helped him in how he played, but it also put a crazy toll on him, on the knees, on his joints, and on the rest of it. And then he left his wife and his 8 children to go with Elza Soares, and essentially he became a villain, really, and she certainly became a villain in the eyes of the Brazilian public, and she was seen as like a homewrecker, essentially. So it was all happening at once.
Well, they played their part of his idiocy. First of all, there's a description when Garrincha first takes Elza back to meet his daughters in Pau Grande, and they live in squalor. There he is, one of the most famous men in the world, and all his kids are living in squalor and filth. And she immediately went out and clothed all the kids and bought them shoes. Yeah, he was pretty negligent.
Well, absolutely insane, criminally negligent, that guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were illiterate, and he was maybe the most famous man in Brazil at the time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And he does get an easy ride from the writer here, doesn't he? There's not much condemnation of what is basically absolutely appalling behaviour.
Well, he is a fucker, Garrincha. At the end of the day,
I mean, that's it, right? I mean, you talk about his insouciant nature, and I talk about his charm, but he just didn't give a fuck, right?
No,
he did not care.
No, walking out on his 8 children, that is crazy. But by God, does Nair pursue him? Not so much Nair as this Mendes, the lawyer.
Just going back to their unpopularity, though, at this time, after it becomes apparent and, the world knows about his family back in Pau Grande, and he's left for Elza Soares, she releases a song called I Am the Other Woman.
Yeah.
And it gets on the radio, and this, of course, does nothing but cement her reputation as a marriage breaker. Garrincha doesn't add to his popularity either he drives back to his hometown, Pau Grande, and runs his dad over with a car when he's drunk, and then fucks off. Oh, come on, lad, come on.
Yeah, hit and run on his dad.
I just think, oh shit, Dad. Uh, you drive off. Oh, that is, oh, absolute gold. Pure gold. His dad, and yeah, at this point, the people of Pau Grande are trying to lynch him, and his dad steps in to defend him. It was my fault. I shouldn't have been walking on the road. I shouldn't have been walking in front of a drunk driver.
He's like the least accountable character I've ever read about in my life.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, for a spell, Elza was his conscience, right? Elza tried to do the right thing for him on occasion, but he is just incapable, right, of doing right. But at this point, I just think the booze is so kicked in that he's never sober, right? He wakes up in the morning,
Yeah,
drinks a glass of cachaça.
he's got
He just,
shakes when he doesn't drink and stuff. Yeah,
and that's just the beginning, isn't it, Johnny? Sadly,
it's just the beginning. Like Elsa is on the left side of the political spectrum. She's done a song for President Django, who was overthrown then in 1964, and I think she had been a spokesperson for various causes and all the rest of it. So they did not like Elza Soares. So when the coup happened, the DOPS, DOPS, the secret police in Brazil, they raided their home, stripped them all naked. And so Garrincha, Elza, her mother, the children, and they killed the minor bird, by the way, one that he got for winning the World Cup in 1962. And yeah, they're just kind of, this happened immediately after the coup. And, this was criminal elements, but I guess it's widely known or understood to have been the secret police.
his wife in Pau Grande, Nair, has herself a lawyer and a shady character indeed. And so at this point, Garrincha's wages are pretty much garnished to 100%, right? He's getting almost everything that he earns is going back, well, it's going to this lawyer, and then a tiny percentage of that is now going to his kids. So they have no money. She has no money. He has no money. And he can't earn any money because everything he earns gets taken by the lawyer.
Yeah, and she's having a hard time making money as well because of the kind of political elements and the big shift there. So TV and whatever, it's kind of turned. And she's also got this problem with her perception publicly, yeah, so that she can't earn much money either. So yeah, and that lawyer, it's unbelievable, isn't it? He pursued him for like 20 years. Anytime Garrincha, like at the end, Garrincha is playing like in circuses essentially and getting paid $150 or something. And this Mendes would be sending letters to a judge looking for like 50% of it every time. Remarkable. That guy was an absolute scumbag.
An absolute scumbag. Because if the money had been going to Nair, then fine, but it wasn't. It was going into this lad's bank account.
Yeah, exactly. This guy was just like living off Garrincha.
After 62, he is no longer really a footballer. I mean, by this time, he is 30 years old, which is when you should start thinking about the end of your career, especially if you're a winger, I would have thought. But of course, he has all these money problems, and he has just a terrible knee, which he never got looked at. He always rejected all doctors' advice.
You'd get the Pau Grande witch doctor in to take a look every now and again.
I take it back. Yes, he got witch doctors involved.
Yeah, so he left Botafogo in 1965 because he just wasn't getting in the team anymore. And after that, it's just kind of people kind of sign him. He goes to Corinthians. He goes to Colombia briefly. I think he played one game. And then he's in Flamengo, Alaria. He's kind of being bought almost out of hope or even sympathy towards the very end.
Well, at this point, he's a commodity, right? He is a name. Yes. And all these teams would sign him because they know that when they do their tours, these crazy tours all over South America and Europe, that he will put bums on seats. But unfortunately, he just wasn't capable of playing anymore. He'd come on for 20 minutes. They would prep the opposition to let him go past them a couple of times. Yeah, at this point, he's a circus performer.
Yeah, so they go to Italy. She's got some gigs there. She really makes a splash in Italy, and then they immediately, it's a bit like how I feel when I listen to samba music myself. I'm like, this is brilliant. And then 4 songs later, it's like, this is kind of all the exact same to me.
Yeah, but it really does make me think of those 4 songs. This is what I'm going to be listening to now.
But yeah, so Italy just essentially just got tired of, like, she was good at the start, and then they're like, okay, whatever. So they're home birds, as you said. They love being in Brazil and they want to go home, but they ran out of money. You were saying, how they always had money problems, but they always spent a lot of money as well, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. She wanted nothing but the best. I mean, she's a true diva. The
Yeah.
original diva, Johnny.
Mm-mm.
And like a diva, she's a fucking dickhead. Yeah, so everything had to be the best. All the clothes. She spent all the advance on the money she got to, appoint a beautiful home. And invariably, this goes wrong.
And
and this is the thing. She'd have these beautiful homes, and Garrincha's childhood friends would just bowl in 8 a.m., help themselves to a drink from the fridge, sit on the couch, piss themselves.
Paintbrush and swing. They would, by the end, like, they managed to go home to Italy because there was, whatever, some TV producer had some idea for whatever TV show he wanted to put on. So they bought a ticket for him, but they had to, like, do a whip around for Garrincha and the rest of them to get them back to Brazil. It's really quite a remarkable story.
It is. And basically, Garrincha lived the rest of his life on whip rounds, right?
Yeah,
he got a job working for the Brazilian Coffee Marketing Board. They felt indebted to him and thought, well, he can do this at least when he's in Italy. And then when he returned home. But of course, Garrincha only turned up to one in like 10 events because he was drunk all the time.
Yeah, and like was it the alcohol, or was he just a bit dim, or what was going on with him?
Was he a bit dim? I mean, I wonder this with Elza Soares. She loves him, right? And you make jokes about the Pau Grande, but what was in it for her by the end?
She really sticks with him. He's an absolute washout. He's suffering like deep depression. Doesn't sound like he's a pile of fun to be around. He's drink driving constantly, and then he killed her mother.
Yeah, he driving his car with his mother and Elza's daughter in it, and he crashed into the back of a potato lorry,
sending her out the window, and she died. And he got like a 2-year sentence for manslaughter, albeit, now, to be fair, that was subsequently overturned on appeal, but he was drunk.
Yeah, he was drunk, but they overlooked that. He went to the hospital, was making jokes with the daughter. The jokes weren't funny. It would appear as well at the end, though, that Elza was having to comfort him for killing her mother.
Yes, that was my takeaway as well.
Which doesn't speak very well of Garrincha. I mean, he fell into a huge depression here, and apparently he did love his mother-in-law very much.
And in the end, when they break up, it's because he's been physically abusive. Like, did he break her cheekbone or something?
Well, there was that, and again, I think the writer sort of lets him out of jail.
He was kicking on the ground and stuff.
Yeah, they said, the first time he could see it, he had scratches on his face, like she had a broken jaw. It's like, oh, that's the same.
So she left him then, and so she was like, fuck that, and she goes. And this is shortly after Garrincha has been born. And Al, tragically, that little boy died in a traffic accident when he was 9.
Yeah, I read that.
Fucking hell, Elza had a tough life, man.
Yeah, she really did.
She died in 2022. They were together for 17 years, so that would bring it up to like the end of the 70s. And he dies in 1983. And he, he has another relationship, has another kid, but then like he's going around trying to just scrounge a living anywhere he can, handouts. The taxman come from at one point, people have to pay off the taxman. But then by the end, he's after Elza, he's put on the float during Carnival and he just can't stand. And like I looked up pictures of this, he's just paralytic because he's taking some kind of medication because he's essentially suffering from psychosis by the end of it. and he's still
Yeah, the
drinking.
pictures at the Sambadrome are the most depressing part. This great man, yeah, who's just leaning against the front of this float, waving timidly, and they called him the zombie of a Mangarea, eh? There he was. It was this big Sambadrome, this is that, and then he was just there looking depressing and close to death on the front.
Yeah, it was a fucking hell, a real tragic end.
Yeah, that's it. And towards the end, he keeps ending up in hospital with like his organs failure. And for a while, the CBF, the Brazil Football Federation, pay his bills, but it just gets to a point where it's $14,000 a pop, and he's just back in next week, back in next week.
Yeah, he was in hospital 8 times in the last year of his life, and like he might be in for 20 days. He was in at one point for 54 days, and it's just extreme alcohol dependency and like the physical toll of that cirrhosis of the liver, psychosis and stuff like that. It sounds terrible.
Yeah, it sounds truly like a living nightmare.
The book is funny in the sense that like you know it's coming. He's about to die, and then he dies, and it's like that's it. There's like not an additional sentence in the book.
I quite enjoyed that fact. I don't know why. That was the end of his life, and that was the end of his life. Yeah, there was nothing really about his legacy at
But
all.
usually those, like if you don't need a chapter, you know, tribute about how amazing he was and all the rest of it, but it was a bit abrupt, I thought.
Yeah, you would have thought they could have found some quotes or something from people, maybe just to talk about him. But
Or even what Elza's reaction was. I would have liked to have known.
it had to be relief. It just must have been relief, like by this stage. Yeah.
Who was his source, do you think? Castro's source.
Well, I looked some of this up, and a lot of the thanks were musicians contemporary to Elza, because I would
Yeah.
imagine that's where his contacts were, which is why we got so much detail about that.
Do you think it was Milton
And
Banana?
I think Milton Banana died, didn't he?
Okay.
He's a bad banana.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that would make sense if that's yeah. Okay, because that guy hasn't written any other football books. I don't think.
Yeah, because there were some details there, and I was like, who were your sources? They say at one point he's lying in hospital, I think after his knee operation, and the nurses used to come in and watch him sleep to look at his dick. Where did you get that information from? Where did you get that information from? And there's a bit also where Elza gets arrested through non-payment of debts just after she's had little Garrincha, and the milk was spilling from her breasts as her child squealed at home. I mean, who told it? Actually, I imagine Elza told him that, right? That sounds like a very Elza fact.
I think that is the source. I think she's the one behind this book.
That's very interesting. And that would speak well of her, because Garrincha being a scumbag is between the lines, right? He's never actually called a scumbag. He's called irresponsible, but he's never actually outwardly derided. It's just his actions are described.
Yeah, and it's not like she's like made out to be a saint or anything. Although she is a bit of a fucking badass.
Oh, she's a badass, all right. But yeah, I can imagine she is hard work as well. So did you listen to it on audiobook, Johnny?
No, Jesus, I had to read it with my eyeballs.
With a real book or your Kindle?
No, Kindle. Yeah, I read it, and yeah, it was fun. I would say that at times he made kind of sweeping statements that didn't seem to have any support, like the thing I said, like 99% of Brazilians were fucking goats. You know, like there was a bit of that here and there, but I also felt that, and maybe this again is to do with where his sources were. I felt that it was better written as the book went on. It's like it improved, I thought.
Oh, I didn't pick up on that, but I enjoyed it all the way through.
No, like I enjoyed the book a lot. I thought it was a lot of fun. And to be transported into this other world and to read about stuff that I knew nothing about really. Like, what did I know about Garrincha? That Brazilians say he was better than Pele and that he had a problem with his legs. And I think I knew that he died in tragic circumstances or had a kind of a tragic life. That was it. I didn't know anything else.
No, well, that's it. And he seems like a product of a bygone. Well, he is a product of a bygone age, of course. But, you know, in terms of years apart, he's what, 7 or 8 years older than Pele? But in
Yes.
my mind, he played hundreds of years ago. Like, he was so old. Pele was color and Garrincha was black and white, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and if Garrincha had looked after himself, he could have played in that 1970 World Cup.
Yeah, he could. What would he been then? He'd been 37, but that was apparently no obstacle to footballers of that time.
But yeah, so okay.
He could have played in the 66 World Cup, by the way, because Gerson injured himself by drinking too much mineral water, which is one of the all-time great injuries.
It certainly seems that Brazilians have a real soft spot for Garrincha.
But I genuinely think he helped define them as a country.
Yeah, well,
I mean, between them, they were Posh and Becks, right? But Posh and Becks times 5 or something.
Just so much more rock and roll. And like, obviously, Garrincha is also a total bastard in a way that Beckham doesn't seem to be at all. But
well, that's it. But Garrincha was actually the best footballer in the world. And she was actually a fabulous musician. And I don't mean that as hard on like Becks. Becks was one of the best footballers, you know, one of the top 20 footballers in the world.
And Posh was one of the top 5 Spice Girls. What?
She was. She really was. Top 4. Baby. Shit.
Yeah, anyway, okay, so what are we gonna how many big sticks?
I'm giving it 4.5 big sticks out of 5. This
Okay,
is my favorite book by a long way, and I would recommend it to anyone. Even if you don't like football, you just get a taste of the country. You get a taste of the times. You get a taste of the music. It's so sexy.
Yeah, it's a pile of fun. It really was. But yeah, I thought the topic and all of that was great. I just thought at times that your man was a bit lazy, the author.
Lazy bloody author.
3.5 for me. Okay.
3.5.
3.5. I would take Neville's out all over this.
Fuck off. Okay. All right. Well, disagreement on the Ademola Bookmen podcast there. Don't listen to Johnny. This is a great book and worth your time. 7 out of 10, my fucking ass. Come on. Well, on that contentious note, thank you very much for joining us on the latest episode of the Ademola Bookmen podcast. In 2 weeks, we'll be back and we're doing full time with Tony Cascarino, a man who is as Irish as I am.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's great, Al. Thank you very much. Thanks to Dara for the music. Thanks to everyone for listening. We are on Instagram and Facebook. Please contact us if you have any recommendations. Now, we're also doing biographies as well as autobiographies.
Yep, thanks very much indeed, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Let your body spin like there is nothing in life but dancing. I can't keep my hands off you, as if this looked like